I'm Rabbi Rod with Messianic Insights, and today I have a visitor with me, a special guest, Ed Pace. And Ed, would you care to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Eddie Pace. I am from Covington, Washington, and I thought I'd join Rabbi Rod as we're going over a passage from the Torah, from Numbers 16, verse 1 through Numbers 18, verse 32.
So, this is kind of an interesting piece, and we're looking at it at kind of a special time because we're about ready to celebrate a revolution and a rebellion that took place 248 years ago when our nation was rebelling against its principal power at that time, which was England. And so it's interesting, we're looking at a rebellion here in Numbers. And the title of this portion is Korah or Korach, as it is in Hebrew. And so it's kind of an interesting story for us to take a look at, maybe talk about a little bit today in this, our 248th year of rebellion and liberty. But in this situation, just a little bit different as we take a look at this particular piece. And so I want to start out with maybe a portion of the scripture. And I want to start out in 16, starting at verse 3. And they assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves. After all, the entire community is holy, every one of them, and Adonai is among them. So why do you lift yourself up above Adonai's assembly?" So it's kind of interesting because oftentimes rebellion, it can happen in your own household, but it's interesting when people challenge, as Moses was, the national leader of Israel, the representative of God. And how do you think that went?
Not very well. Not very well at all, no. So when this rebellion happened, uh, basically they were just upset over a whole lot of things. Context before this happened, basically Israel had tried to go into the promised land by first sending some spies there. As you'll see, as we went over this, 10 out of the 12 spies were saying, no, we cannot do this, this is not going to work. And then they encouraged the entire community that this wasn't going to work. Only 2 spies said, we can do this. And basically, after all this happened, God said, okay, so you are going to spend the next 40 years in the desert. This whole generation is going to pass away. You will not enter the promised land. And then in chapter 16, the entire community is upset. They're angry. They're having a really bad day. They're very cranky. And basically, they go up against Moses and Aaron and they say, you have taken too much upon yourself. This is not okay. You've put us in the desert and we're going to die here. And they try to gain power. And basically, what happens is Moses and Aaron go flat on their face. They say, okay, you'll read it says that they went and they said, if you will offer this incense tomorrow, we'll see who the Lord has chosen. And basically, after that happens, they end up offering the incense, and you'll see that Korah, and basically they end up getting said, hey, distance yourself from them. The ground goes and swallows them up, swallows the 250 men. The men who were offering the incense get burned up, swept away, and God really intervenes and answers this challenge.
Well, I think a lot of times when we look at our enemies or people that oppose us, we would hope that the ground would swallow up and take them away. But it's kind of interesting because it wasn't just a rebellion against maybe Moses and Aaron, but it was a rebellion against maybe God's authority. And I want to say that's a whole different thing. And we don't often think that our national leaders can maybe represent God in some unusual ways, and certainly Moses did. Moses was certainly the civil authority, and Aaron was the religious authority. And kind of interesting that during this rebellion, that basically God says through Moses, basically have them line up, and we'll see who God's anointed is and who's chosen, who's been chosen to lead. And I want to say after that, there's really no question to who's in charge and whose authority it is. Care to comment?
Yes, and even with the materials used to offer the incense, God even takes it a step further and has it hammered down to use an example of saying this is the authority that I have chosen. Do not go against this. They later on even go have staves put inside, and it said basically whichever staff has buds on them after the end of the day, this is to show who God has chosen. And so Aaron was chosen by God, rather than the men who were going against him as leadership over Israel.
It's ironic that we often don't see civil leadership and religious leadership being together. And when we do, we see a blessing in that. And really, when those challenges come up, especially those challenges against basically what is right and wrong in the leadership, both in civil matters, but also in religious matters, when we see that those two work hand in hand, that's really a good unity. And I want to say that was something that we saw in the initial America, was we saw that the civil leadership, they didn't overthrow God at all. In fact, they embraced it. They embraced God. And they didn't really overthrow the culture or civil ordinance, but they basically overthrew a tyrannical, oppressive government. And I want to say that sometimes we can see civil disobedience, like against England, as a good thing, and because it was about freedom and liberty. And at the same time, we can see that when civil disobedience against what is right and wrong and against God's anointed can be a very bad thing, where God is going to intervene in those circumstances. And that's kind of the contrast that we see in this particular portion. We can look at the book of Romans.